I stared at my laptop screen, reading the poetry confession my roommate just posted online. My hands went numb. Every detail he described about the mystery poet he'd fallen for, the cadence, the imagery, the midnight posting habit pointed directly at me. He had no idea we'd been living together for 8 months, and I had no idea how to tell him the truth without shattering everything we'd built. If you enjoy this story, please like this video and subscribe for more heartfelt true stories. My name is Henry Hemsworth. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a restoration ecologist for a nonprofit in Buffalo, New York. My job involves a lot of fieldwork monitoring wetland recovery sites, conducting soil tests, writing grant reports. It's solitary work most of the time, which suits me fine. I've always been more comfortable with sediment samples than small talk. I moved to Buffalo 2 years ago from Syracuse. The job was good. The pay was decent, but I didn't know anyone, and making friends as an adult felt harder than any scientific process I'd ever learned. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment in the Elmwood Village neighborhood, near the corner of Auburn and Bidwell. It was a quiet street, brick row houses, old maples, the kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts. That's when I started writing poetry. I'd never written anything creative before. In college, I was all lab reports and field journals. But something about the isolation in Buffalo cracked me open. I'd come home after a long day tracking invasive phragmites in Tift Nature Preserve, and I'd sit at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and just write. About wind patterns over Lake Erie, about the way snow collected in the grooves of tree bark, about loneliness. I didn't show anyone. I didn't even save most of it. But 6 months ago stumbled onto an online poetry forum called Versecraft. It was small, maybe 200 active members. People posted original work under pseudonyms. The community was supportive, thoughtful. No one knew who anyone really was, and that anonymity felt like permission. I chose the username Sultanshado. I started posting late at night, usually around 11 or midnight, after I'd finished reading field studies. My poems were quiet, observational. A lot of them were about landscape and memory. One was about my father, who died when I was 19. Another was about the first time I realized I was gay, standing in a rainstorm outside a college library, too afraid to go inside and meet the guy I'd been messaging. The responses were kind. People said my work had a melancholy precision. Someone called it emotionally geological, which made me laugh. But I also loved it. And then, 3 months ago, I started noticing one commenter in particular. His username was Emberscript. He left detailed, thoughtful feedback on almost everything I posted. He didn't just say "nice job" or drop a generic compliment. He'd quote specific lines, ask questions about word choice, point out patterns I hadn't even noticed in my own work. His comments were always encouraging, but sharp. He saw things. I started looking forward to his responses. I'd post a poem and refresh the page obsessively, waiting to see if Emberscript had read it yet. When he commented, I'd read his words 5, 6, 7 times. I started reading his poetry too. He wrote about fire, transformation, things breaking and rebuilding. His work had an intensity mine didn't. Where I was careful and restrained, he was bold, sometimes reckless. I admired that. We started messaging privately on the platform. Nothing too personal at first, just craft talk. He'd ask what inspired a certain image. I'd ask how he structured a particular piece. But slowly, over weeks, the conversations deepened. He told me he lived in Buffalo. I told him I did too. He said he worked in public health education. I said I worked in ecology. We didn't exchange real names. That felt important somehow. The anonymity let us be honest in a way I don't think we could have been otherwise. He told me he'd been through a difficult breakup 2 years ago, that he was still learning how to trust people again. I told him I never really had a serious relationship, that I'd spent most of my 20s convinced I wasn't worth anyone's time. One night, after I posted a poem about my father's funeral, he sent me a message that said, "You write about loss like someone who's still carrying it carefully. I hope you know you're allowed to set it down sometimes." I cried, reading that. I didn't tell him, but I cried. And somewhere in all of this, I realized I was falling for him. It felt absurd. I didn't know his real name. I didn't know what he looked like. We'd never spoken out loud, but I knew the way his mind worked. I knew his sense of humor dry, a little self-deprecating. I knew he drank too much coffee and stayed up too late. I knew he was kind. I wanted to meet him, but I was terrified. What if the reality didn't match? What if he saw me and felt disappointed? What if I was building something in my head that couldn't exist in real life? So I didn't ask. I just kept writing, kept messaging, kept falling, and then my landlord told me my building was being sold. I had 60 days to find a new place. The rental market in Buffalo was brutal that spring. Everything was either too expensive or too far from work, or already taken. I was getting desperate, scrolling through listings during my lunch breaks, coming up empty. That's when I saw the post on a local housing forum. Someone was looking for a roommate. 2-bedroom apartment in Allentown, near Franklin and Virginia. Rent was reasonable. The listing said the guy was 30, worked in public health, quiet, respectful, LGBTQ friendly. I messaged him. His name was Steve Trent. We met for coffee at a place called Bean and Leaf on Allen Street. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends. He wore a green flannel shirt and wire-rimmed glasses. He had an easy smile, the kind that made you feel like you'd known him longer than 5 minutes. We talked about the apartment, about Buffalo winters, about work. He asked what I did, and when I said restoration ecologist, he lit up. He said he'd volunteered with the wetland cleanup project once and loved it. I liked him immediately. He felt steady, grounded, the kind of person you could share space with and not feel crowded. We signed the lease a week later. I moved in mid-April. The apartment was on the second floor of an old Victorian house. Hardwood floors, high ceilings. My bedroom faced east, and in the mornings the light came in gold and soft. Steve's room was across the hall. We shared a kitchen, a bathroom, a living room with the couch we'd both agreed was ugly, but comfortable. It was easy living with him. He worked long hours coordinating sexual health outreach programs for the county, so a lot of nights he wasn't home until 7 or 8. I was usually in the field until late afternoon, then home writing reports. We'd cross paths in the kitchen, make small talk, occasionally watch a movie together on weekends. He introduced me to his friends a few times. I met them for trivia at a bar on Allen Street. I was awkward, but they were nice. I didn't tell him about my poetry. I didn't tell him about EmberScript. Those things felt separate, private. But I kept writing. I kept messaging. EmberScript told me one night that he'd just moved in with a new roommate, that it was going well, that he felt less lonely than he had in a long time. I was happy for him. I told him I'd recently moved too, that my roommate seemed like a good guy. We joked about the weird things roommates do. He said his new roommate was a scientist of some kind, always reading dense articles at the kitchen table. I laughed and said my roommate worked in public health and sometimes practiced educational workshop scripts out loud in the living room. It didn't occur to me, not even for a second. 2 months passed. Summer came. Steve and I fell into a rhythm. He'd make coffee in the mornings, strong and dark, and leave a cup for me on the counter. I'd bring home fresh vegetables from the farmer's market on Saturdays, and we'd cook together. Nothing fancy, just pasta or stir-fry. He'd tell me about his week. I'd tell him about mine. He was easy to talk to. I started to feel like maybe, for the first time since moving to Buffalo, I had a friend. And then one Friday night in late June, Steve went out with coworkers. I stayed home. I'd had a long week in the field, monitoring a stream restoration site near Amherst, and I was exhausted. I made tea. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. I opened Versecraft. There was a new post from EmberScript, but it wasn't a poem. It was titled, "I think I'm in love with someone I've never met." My chest tightened. I clicked on it. The post was long. He wrote about how he'd been talking to someone on Versecraft for months. How this person's poetry had moved him in ways he didn't know how to explain. How their private messages had become the best part of his day. How he felt seen and understood in a way he hadn't felt in years. How he was terrified because he didn't know if this person felt the same way. How he didn't even know this person's real name. And then he started describing me, not by name, but by detail. He talked about the way I wrote about landscape, the way I used silence in my poems. He mentioned a specific poem I'd posted 2 weeks earlier, about standing on the edge of Lake Erie at dawn, feeling small and held at the same time. He said it had made him cry. He said he wanted to meet me, but he didn't know how to ask. I couldn't breathe. I read the post 3 times. My hands were shaking, and then I heard the front door open. Steve was home. I closed my laptop so fast, I almost knocked over my tea. My heart was pounding. Steve walked into the kitchen, smiling, a little flushed from the heat outside. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked happy. "Hey," he said. "You're still up?" "Yeah, I managed." My voice sounded strange. "Just working on some stuff." He opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. "How was your day?" "Fine. Good. Long. You?" "Same. We had a training session that ran late, and then a few of us went to get tacos." He leaned against the counter. "You eat yet?" "Yeah, earlier." He nodded. There was a pause. I could feel the weight of my laptop between us, like it was radiating heat. "You okay?" he asked. "You seem weird." "I'm fine. Just tired." He studied me for a second, then shrugged. "All right. I'm gonna shower and probably crash. But hey, tomorrow, if you're free, a few of us are going to hit up Candleside. Live music thing. You should come." "Maybe. I'll let you know." "Cool." He smiled again and headed toward the hallway. I heard the bathroom door close. The water started running. I opened my laptop again, stared at Emberscript's post. "Read it a 4th time." It was him. It had to be him. The timeline matched. The details matched. The way he described my poetry, the specific poem he referenced, there was no one else it could be. Steve was Emberscript. My roommate was the person I'd been falling for online, and he had no idea. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every conversation we'd had in person, every message we'd exchanged online, trying to reconcile the 2 versions of him in my head. They fit together so perfectly, it felt obvious in hindsight. The kindness, the thoughtfulness, the way he asked questions and really listened to the answers. Of course, it was him. But what was I supposed to do now? If I told him, how would he react? Would he feel betrayed that I hadn't said something sooner? Would he think I'd been lying to him this whole time? And what if he didn't feel the same way in person? Online, we were equals, just 2 people sharing words. In real life, I was his awkward roommate who barely made eye contact and spent most of his time ankle deep in wetlands. I thought about messaging him as Sultanzada, telling him I wanted to meet. But that felt dishonest. Now, I knew who he was. He didn't know who I was. The power imbalance made my stomach turn. By the time the sun came up, I still hadn't decided anything. I got out of bed, made coffee, tried to act normal. Steve was already in the kitchen when I walked in. He was eating cereal and scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled. Morning. You sleep okay?" "Not really." "Yeah. You look kind of wrecked." He said it gently, not mean. "You sure you're all right?" "I'm fine." I poured coffee. My hands were unsteady. He watched me for a moment. Then he said, "Hey, can I ask you something?" My heart stopped. "Sure. Do you write? Like, creatively?" I froze. "Why?" "I don't know. I've just noticed you're always on your laptop at night. And a couple times I've seen you with a notebook. I thought maybe you journaled or something." Yeah, sometimes. Nothing serious." "That's cool." He smiled. "I used to write poetry in college. I wasn't very good, but I liked it." The irony was suffocating. I made myself smile back. "That's cool." He nodded and went back to his cereal. The moment passed. I exhaled. That afternoon, I went to Tift Nature Preserve and walked the trails for 2 hours. I needed to think. I needed to be somewhere quiet. The preserve was mostly empty. Just me and the red-winged blackbirds and the wind moving through the cattails. I kept coming back to the same question. What did I actually want? I wanted him. I wanted Steve. I wanted the version of him I knew online and the version I knew in person, because they were the same person, and I was in love with both. But I didn't know how to bridge the gap without ruining everything. By the time I got home, I'd made a decision. I was going to tell him. Not right away. I needed to figure out the right way to do it. But I couldn't keep this secret. It wasn't fair to either of us. That night, I logged into Versecraft. Emberscript had posted a new poem. It was about longing, about reaching for something just out of focus. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, and I knew it was about me. I sent him a private message. I kept it simple. I read your post. I feel the same way. I think we should meet. I hit send before I could second guess myself. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, there was a response wave. Really? You mean it? God. I've been terrified to say anything. Yes. Let's meet. When? We decided on the following Saturday. Neutral location. A coffee shop called Tipico on Niagara Street. Noon. We'd both describe what we'd be wearing so we could recognize each other. The week leading up to it was agony. I barely saw Steve. He was working long hours on a new county initiative. I was in the field most days, surveying a site near Grand Island. When we were home at the same time, I couldn't look at him without feeling like I was going to explode. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, and he was just being polite. On Friday night, he knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting on my bed, staring at my phone, trying to figure out what I was going to say the next day. Yeah. He opened the door halfway. Hey, you busy tomorrow? My throat went dry. Kind of. Why? I have this thing. Meeting someone. It's kind of a big deal. He looked nervous, excited, vulnerable. I don't know. I guess I wanted to tell you. That's great, I said. My voice sounded hollow. I hope it goes well. Thanks. Me too, he hesitated. You've been kind of distant lately. Just wanted to make sure we're good. We're good, he nodded. Okay, cool. He closed the door. I didn't sleep again that night. I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan turn, rehearsing conversations that all sounded wrong. At some point around 4 in the morning, I gave up and took a shower. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at nothing. Steve came out of his room at 10:30. He was wearing dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt. He'd shaved. He looked nervous and hopeful, and I wanted to tell him right then, but the words wouldn't come. Big day, he said, pouring himself coffee. Yeah. You doing anything? Meeting a friend. I lied. Cool. He checked his phone, ran a hand through his hair. I'm meeting them at noon. I should probably leave soon. Traffic might be weird. Good luck. He smiled. Thanks. I'm terrified. You'll be great. He left at 11:15. I waited 10 minutes, then left too. I walked to Tipico. It took 25 minutes. The whole way, I practiced what I'd say. None of it sounded right. The coffee shop was small, brick walls, and mismatched furniture. I got there at 11:50, ordered an iced coffee I didn't want, sat at a table near the window. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Noon came. The door opened. Steve walked in. He was looking around, scanning faces. He was holding his phone. He looked exactly like someone meeting a stranger. And then his eyes landed on me. I watched the confusion cross his face. Then the recognition. Then the shock. He walked over slowly, sat down across from me. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Henry? His voice was barely above a whisper. Hi, you're Sultan's Hado? Yeah. He stared at me. His face went through about 6 different emotions. I couldn't read any of them. How long have you known? A week. Since you posted that you were in love with someone you'd never met. A week. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his face with both hands. Jesus, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know it was you until I read that post. And then I panicked. You've been living with me this whole time. He said it like he was testing the reality of it. All those conversations. You knew. No, at first, I swear. I had no idea until last Friday. He was quiet. I couldn't tell if he was angry, or hurt, or relieved. Maybe all three. Say something, I said. Please. I don't know what to say. He looked at me, really looked at me. You're Sultan's Hado. You wrote that poem about your father, about the lake, about being afraid. Yeah. And you've been living across the hall from me for 3 months. Yeah. And you didn't think to mention it? I didn't know, not until last week. And once I did, I didn't know how to tell you without making it worse. So you let me walk in here thinking I was meeting a stranger. I know. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have messaged you and explained. But I was scared you'd feel betrayed, or like I'd been lying to you, and I stopped. Took a breath. I'm sorry. He was quiet again. Then he said, do you actually feel the same way? Or were you just saying that to let me down easy? What? In your message, you said you felt the same way. Did you mean it? I looked at him, at his gray blue eyes, and the uncertainty in his face, and the way he was holding his coffee cup like it was the only solid thing in the room. Yes, I said. I meant it. His expression shifted, softened. Really? I've been falling for you since before I even knew who you were. And then I moved in, and I liked you as my roommate, and I didn't connect the two, but now that I know, it makes sense. You make sense. He exhaled slowly, set his coffee down. This is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. I know. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. He smiled a little. I'm not mad. I'm just processing. Okay. You really didn't know it was me? I really didn't. I'm oblivious. You can ask anyone. He laughed. It was a short, startled sound, but it was real. God, we've been talking for months. Yeah. And living together. Yeah. And I've been walking around the apartment, having a full-on crisis about whether to tell you I was meeting someone because I didn't want it to be weird. And the whole time it was you. I know. I'm sorry. Wait, no, not supposed to apologize. Yeah, it was me. He shook his head, but he was smiling now. This is insane. Oh, I don't know what to do with this information either. We sat there for a moment. The coffee shop hummed around us. Someone's espresso machine hissed. A couple at the counter laughed about something. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Can I ask you something? Steve said. Yeah. Why didn't you ever want to meet before? I suggested it a couple times. You always change the subject. I looked down at my coffee. I was scared. I thought if we met in person, you'd realize I wasn't. I don't know. Enough. Interesting enough. Worth it. Henry, he said my name like it hurt him. You're one of the most interesting people I've ever met. Online or otherwise. You didn't think that before. When we first became roommates, I was just the weird, quiet guy who worked with dirt. That's not true. I thought you were thoughtful and kind and a little hard to read, but in a way that made me want to know you better. He paused. I had a crush on you actually. Like, a real one. I just didn't think you were interested. I stared at him. What? Yeah, the first month we lived together, I kept trying to figure out if you were into guys and if you were into me, and I couldn't tell, so I stopped trying. I didn't want to make things awkward. You had a crush on me. Yes. This whole time. Not the whole time. It faded after a while, or I thought it did, and then I started talking to Sultan's Hado, and I fell for you all over again without even realizing it. I didn't know what to say. My brain felt like it was moving through water. So, what do we do now? I asked. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I don't know. This is complicated. We live together. If we try this and it doesn't work, things could get really messy. I know. But I don't want to not try. He looked at me. Do you? No, I don't want to not try. Okay. So, we try. He smiled. It was the smile I'd seen 100 times across the kitchen table, but it felt different now. It felt like the beginning of something. Can I take you to dinner? He asked. Like, an actual date? Yeah, I'd like that. Tonight? Tonight's good. We left the coffee shop together, walked back to the apartment side by side. It was strange and easy at the same time. He told me he'd been rereading my poems all week, trying to find clues about who I was. I told him I'd been doing the same with his. We compared notes, laughed about how obvious it seemed now. When we got home, He said he needed to change and plan where to take me. I said I needed to do the same. We went to our separate rooms. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall and felt like my entire life had just rearranged itself. That night, he took me to a small Italian place on Elmwood. We sat outside on the patio. The air was warm and the light was golden, and we talked for 3 hours. About poetry, about work, about all the things we told each other online, and all the things we hadn't. He told me about his ex, about how that relationship had ended badly and left him afraid to trust people. I told him about my father, about how losing him had made me feel like I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't want to rush this, Steve said at one point. I want to do it right. Me too. But I also don't want to pretend. We haven't been building toward this for months. We don't have to pretend. He reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was warm. I didn't pull away. We walked home slowly. He asked if he could kiss me. I said yes. It was soft and careful, and it felt like every poem I'd ever written. The first few weeks were strange in the best way. We were still roommates. We still had separate rooms. But now, we'd have dinner together, and then end up on the couch, his head on my shoulder, talking until midnight. Or I'd be working on a grant report at the kitchen table, and he'd come up behind me and kiss the top of my head before heading out for work. We decided not to tell people right away, not because we were hiding, but because we wanted to figure out what we were doing first. His friends knew he'd met someone. My coworkers knew I seemed happier, but we kept the details private. One Saturday in July, we drove out to Letchworth State Park. It was his idea. He said he wanted to see me in my element. We hiked the Gorge Trail, and I pointed out plant species and explained the geology of the area. And he listened like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. We stood at the edge of the Upper Falls, and he said, "You should write a poem about this." Maybe I will. Can I read it when you're done? You always do. He kissed me right there, with the waterfall roaring behind us, and the sun hot on our shoulders. A family with kids walked past, and one of the children said, "They're kissing." And we both laughed. In August, we told his friends. We met them at a bar on Allen Street. They were surprised but supportive. One of them, a woman named Renee who worked with Steve, said, "I knew you two would end up together. You had the same energy." "What does that mean?" Steve asked. "I don't know. You just fit." I thought about that a lot. The idea of fitting. I'd spent so much of my life feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. But with Steve, I didn't have to try. I just was. We still wrote poetry. We still posted on Versecraft, though less frequently. The community figured out we'd met in person. People were happy for us. One user said it was the most romantic thing they'd ever heard. Another joked that we should write a joint collection called Roommates to Lovers, a poetry anthology. We both laughed, but secretly I loved the idea. In September, Steve had a work crisis. Budget cuts at the county level meant his department was being restructured. There was a chance his position would be eliminated. He came home one night looking hollowed out, and I held him on the couch while he talked through his options. Apply for other jobs. Move to a different city. Try to wait it out. "I don't want to leave Buffalo," he said. "I don't want to leave you. You won't have to. We'll figure it out. What if I can't find anything here? Then we'll figure that out too." He looked at me. "You'd come with me? If you wanted me to." "Yeah." He kissed me. "I love you." "I don't think I've said that yet." "You haven't." "I love you too." His position didn't get eliminated. They restructured his role instead, gave him more responsibilities and a small raise. He was relieved. So was I. The idea of leaving Buffalo had felt wrong. We were building something here. In October, we started talking about getting a different apartment, a place that was ours, not just a shared rental. We looked at listings online. Imagine what it would be like to pick out furniture together, to have a bedroom that was both of ours. It felt like a big step. It felt right. One evening in late October, I was at the kitchen table working on a report when Steve came home with a bag from a bookstore. He pulled out a small leather-bound journal and handed it to me. "What's this?" "It's for you. I thought maybe you could use it for drafts. Or whatever." I opened it. The pages were thick, cream-colored. On the inside cover, he'd written, "For Sultan's Hotto. Keep writing." Ember script. I looked up at him. "This is perfect." Yeah. He sat down across from me. "I was thinking, we should submit some of our work somewhere. Like, actually try to get published." "You think?" "I do. I think we're good. I think people should read what we write." "I don't know. That feels scary." "It is scary. But you're brave. You just don't realize it." I thought about that. About the fact that I'd spent so many years hiding. From people. From feelings. From the idea that I deserved to be seen. And then I'd met Steve. Online and in person. And he'd seen me anyway. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." We spent the next month putting together a submission. We chose a small literary journal based in upstate New York. We each submitted 2 poems. We didn't tell each other which ones. We wanted it to be a surprise. In December, we got an email. They'd accepted 1 poem from each of us. They'd be published in the spring issue. We celebrated with cheap wine and takeout from our favorite Thai place. Steve raised his glass. "To Sultan's Hotto and Ember script. And to Henry and Steve. To us." We clinked glasses. And I thought about how a year ago, I'd been sitting alone in my old apartment, writing poetry in the dark, convinced no one would ever really know me. And now I was here, with him, known and knowing. Christmas came. We spent it with his family in Rochester. They were warm and loud and overwhelming in the best way. His mom pulled me aside at one point and said, "I haven't seen him this happy in years." "Thank you. I didn't do anything." "You did. You're here New Year's Eve." We stayed in, made dinner together, watched the countdown on TV. At midnight, he kissed me and said, "This year is going to be good. I can feel it." Yeah. In January, we signed a lease on a new apartment. 1 bedroom, Elmwood Village, just a few blocks from where I used to live alone. We moved in on a Saturday. His friends helped. We unpacked boxes and argued about where to put the couch and ordered pizza. By the end of the night, we were exhausted, and the apartment was a mess, but it was ours. That night, we lay in bed together in the dark. Our bed, our room. I could hear his breathing, slow and even. I thought about all the things that had to happen for us to end up here. The job in Buffalo, the poetry forum, the random housing post, the timing of it all. "You awake?" he whispered. "Yeah." I was just thinking, what if you hadn't seen that post? The one about me being in love with someone I'd never met? I don't know. I guess we would have figured it out eventually, maybe. Or maybe we would have just kept being roommates who didn't know. That would have been sad. Yeah, it would have. He rolled over to face me. I could barely see him in the dark, but I could feel him close. "I'm glad you saw it," he said. "Me too. And I'm glad you had the guts to tell me, even though you were terrified. I'm glad you didn't hate me for keeping it a secret. I could never hate you." He kissed me, soft, slow. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, too." We fell asleep like that, tangled together. Safe. In February, the literary journal came out. We each bought 3 copies, sat on the couch and read our poems in print for the first time. His was about fire and rebuilding. Mine was about wetlands and recovery. They were on facing pages. "The editor had done that on purpose," Steve said, "because they worked together. Like us." I said, "Like us." We framed the pages, hung them in the hallway. Spring came. I went back into the field. Steve's work picked up. We fell into a new rhythm. Mornings, making coffee together. Evenings, cooking dinner. Weekends exploring Buffalo, finding new trails and restaurants and quiet places. We kept writing, kept posting, kept building. One Sunday in April, we were walking through Delaware Park. The trees were just starting to bud. The air smelled like thaw and soil and green things waking up. Steve stopped near Hoyt Lake and turned to me. "I want to spend my life with you," he said. "I want to spend my life with you too." He smiled, took my hand. "I'm not proposing. Not yet. I just wanted you to know. I know. And I feel the same way." We kept walking. The lake was calm, reflecting the sky. A heron stood in the shallows, perfectly still. I thought about patience, about the way some things take time to become what they're meant to be. That night, I wrote a poem. It wasn't about loneliness or loss or longing. It was about finding something you didn't know you were looking for, about recognition, about home. I posted it on Versecraft under Sultan's Hado. Within an hour, Emberscript had commented, "This is my favorite thing you've ever written. Thank you for letting me be part of your story." I walked across the apartment to our bedroom. Steve was already in bed, reading on his phone. I climbed in beside him. "I just read your poem," he said. "I know. I saw your comment. Did you mean it? The part about home? Every word." He set his phone down, pulled me close. I love you too." We stayed like that for a long time. The window was open. I could hear the city sounds, cars passing, someone laughing on the sidewalk, the distant hum of the highway. Buffalo had felt like a temporary place when I first moved here, a spot on a map where I'd ended up by accident. But it didn't feel temporary anymore. In May, we went back to Letchworth, hiked the same trail we had done the summer before. This time, I brought my field notebook and sketched the plant communities along the gorge. Steve took photos. We had a picnic near the middle, fall sandwiches and fruit and the last of the good weather before summer heat set in. "I've been thinking," he said, lying on his back in the grass, "about the future. Yeah, I want to do more with my writing, not just post online. I want to try for a collection, a real one." "You should. You're good enough. So are you. We could both try." "Not maybe. Yes. We'll both try. We'll keep each other accountable." I smiled. "Okay, deal." He sat up, looked at me seriously. "And I want us to stay in Buffalo. I know it's not the most exciting city. I know there are bigger places with more opportunities. But I like it here. I like our life. So we're staying?" "We're staying." He grinned, kissed me. "Good." June brought heat and humidity, the kind that made the air feel thick. I spent long days in the field, often up to my knees in water, checking on restoration sites. Steve ran summer health education programs for teens. We were both exhausted most nights, but we still made time for each other, for writing, for the small rituals that made us feel like ourselves. One evening in late June, we were sitting on the fire escape outside our bedroom window. It was cooler out there, a slight breeze coming off the lake. Steve had a beer, I had iced tea. We weren't talking, just existing together. Comfortable silence. "Can I tell you something?" he said after a while. "Always. I used to think I was broken after my ex. Like something in me didn't work right, and that's why it fell apart." "You're not broken. I know that now. But I didn't for a long time." He looked at me. "You helped me see that. Not by fixing me, just by being you, by being patient, by staying. I'm not going anywhere, I know. And that's the thing. I actually believe you. I didn't think I'd ever believe anyone again." Reached for his hand. He laced his fingers through mine. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For writing poetry on the internet. For moving into my apartment. For being brave enough to show up at that coffee shop even though you were terrified. For all of it. Thank you for commenting on my poems. For being Emberscript. For seeing me." We sat there until the sky turned dark and the streetlights came on. Then we climbed back inside and went to bed. July, August. The summer passed in a blur of work and heat and long weekends. We went to a music festival at Cannelside, took a day trip to Niagara Falls, visited the Albright Knox Art Gallery, and spent 2 hours looking at paintings. Then went home and tried to write ekphrastic poems about what we'd seen. In September, we both submitted manuscripts to a small press that specialized in poetry. We didn't tell each other what we'd sent. We wanted it to be separate, our own individual work, even though we knew we'd shaped each other's writing by proximity. In October, Steve got an acceptance email. His manuscript had been chosen for publication. I screamed when he told me. We danced around the kitchen, called his mom, opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving. 2 weeks later, I got a rejection. Polite, encouraging, but still a no. I was disappointed, but not devastated. Steve held me and said, "You'll get the next one. I know you will, me." Not maybe. Definitely. I submitted to another press in November, then another in December. Tried not to think about it. Focused on work, on Steve, on the life we were building. In January, a year after we'd moved into our apartment together, Steve surprised me. He'd planned a whole day, breakfast at my favorite diner on Elmwood, a walk through the botanical gardens, dinner at the Italian place where we'd had our first date. After dinner, we walked home through the cold. The streets were quiet. Snow was starting to fall, light and soft. When we got to our building, he stopped me on the front steps. "I have something for you," he said. He pulled a small box from his coat pocket, opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring. "No, we said we'd wait," he said. "But I don't want to wait anymore. I want to marry you. I want everyone to know you're mine, and I'm yours. Will you marry me?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. He slipped the ring onto my finger, kissed me right there on the steps. Snow falling around us. "Is that a yes?" he asked, smiling. "Yes, it's a yes." We went inside, called our families, texted friends, made plans we'd refine later. All that mattered was that we'd said yes to each other, to this life, to everything that came next. In March, I got an email, a different press, one I'd almost forgotten about. They wanted to publish my manuscript. I read the email 3 times to make sure it was real. Then I ran to find Steve. He was in the living room, grading program evaluations for work. I shoved my phone in his face. "Read this." He read it, looked up at me. "Oh my God. I know. You did it." "I did it." He stood up and hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. "I'm so proud of you. We both did it. We're both getting published." "Yeah, we are." We decided to have a small wedding, just family and close friends. Late May, at a garden venue outside the city. Simple and quiet and ours. We wrote our own vows. Steve cried, reading his. So did I. His vows talked about poetry and recognition and finding home in another person. Mine talked about wetlands and restoration and how love is a kind of recovery. Our families cried. Our friends cheered. We kissed. And it felt like every beginning we'd ever had. All at once. At the reception, one of Steve's friends gave a speech. She talked about how she'd known something was going to happen between us from the first time we all met. How we looked at each other like we were reading something only the two of us could see. "And I guess that's what you were doing," she said. "Reading each other's words, falling in love one poem at a time." Everyone laughed. Steve squeezed my hand under the table. That night, in the hotel room we'd booked, he said, "I can't believe we're married. I can. It feels right." Yeah, it does. We lay in bed, still in our wedding clothes, too tired to change. The window was open. I could hear crickets and the wind in the trees. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met?" I asked. "Sometimes. But not in a sad way. Just in a wow, we got lucky way." We did get lucky. Yeah, we did. Our books came out within 2 months of each other. His in September, mine in November. We did a joint reading at a bookstore on Hurdle Avenue. The room was packed. Friends, family, strangers who'd seen the event listing. We each read 3 poems. The audience was silent, attentive. Afterward, people came up to buy copies, to tell us how much our work meant to them. One woman, maybe in her 60s, but both books. She said, "I read about you two online, about how you met. It gives me hope." "Hope for what?" Steve asked. "That there are still good love stories. Real ones." We signed her books, thanked her, watched her leave with them tucked under her arm. "That was nice," I said. "Yeah, it was." We sold out of both books that night. The bookstore had to order more. In December, we went back to Letchworth one more time before winter made the trails too dangerous. We stood at the upper falls, bundled in coats and scarves. The water was loud, and the air was freezing, but it was beautiful. "I wrote a poem here once," I said. "The first time we came. Do you remember?" "I remember." "Did you ever finish it?" "Yeah, it's in my book. It's called Recognition." I don't think I've read that one." "You have. You just didn't know it was about you." He smiled, pulled me close. "Read it to me." So I did. Right there, with the falls behind us and the cold biting at our faces. I recited it from memory. It was about seeing someone clearly for the first time, about realizing they'd been there all along. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's us. Yeah, that's us." We stayed until the sun started to set, painting the gorge in shades of gold and amber. Then we hiked back to the car and drove home to Buffalo, to our apartment, to the life we'd built together, one word at a time. And I thought about the night I'd first posted on Versecraft as Sultan's Hotto, lonely and unsure, hoping someone might read my words and understand. I thought about Ember Script's first comment, thoughtful and kind, making me feel seen. I thought about all the things that had to align for us to find each other. The job posting, the housing search, the timing, the chance. But maybe it wasn't chance. Maybe it was just what happens when you're brave enough to share your truth, even when you're scared.